Reenactors don't always like it when I say it, but I've said for years, why do we reenact the war when it's the peace that's so much more interesting, exciting, and ultimately beneficial to our children and for the generations to come?
That's Ken Elston, the chairman of the George Mason University Theater Department. He wrote and directed a dramatization of the Peace Jubilee for the city of Manassas.
It's a far-reaching sort of epic outdoor piece that is, part theater, part spectacle, part halftime show.
Elston's historical theater troupe Footsteps in Time recreated the unprecedented reunion of veterans from North and South who came together in Manassas on July 21, 1911 for a celebration of peace and national unity, 50 years to the day after the first major land battle of the Civil War.
With the possible exception of the Persian Wars, this is the first time in recorded history that former enemies met on the same battlefield where they once met in mortal combat to affirm peace. And that's pretty exciting. When you look at the history of the world, the U.S. is unique for a lot of reasons. One of those reasons is that we had this terrible 4-year struggle of the American Civil War and came out of it a stronger nation. I'm from Philadelphia, and in Philadelphia we always celebrate the birth of the nation, 1776. And it seems to me that here in Manassas, Virginia, we celebrate the rebirth of a nation.
I think one of the stories that is, sometimes lost at Manassas, because the battle being the first battle grabs the nation's attention, is this story of reconciliation.
It's a story Manassas National Battlefield Park Superintendent Ed Clark doesn't get to tell as often as he'd like.
Both sides taking up, their previous positions and marching across the field instead of this time not in anger and not with bloodshed on their mind, but with peace and reconciliation in their mind. And instead of meeting with arms, they met with handshakes, and very moving and stirring and very meaningful to those veterans.
George Carr Round, the Union officer who proclaimed peace with his signal rockets in Raleigh at the end of the war, was not at the First Battle of Manassas, although he too was profoundly affected by his experiences throughout the conflict. He was stationed in Manassas for a while later in the war to defend the strategic railroad junction. Round became a lawyer in New York and returned to settle in Manassas in 1868. Although some of the locals dismissed him as a carpetbagger at first, Round became a pillar of the community.
He named the streets. So we're at the corner of Grant and Lee. We're at the corner of Grant and Lee so that they would forever meet in peaceful accord. That was very important to him.
The inscription on his tombstone at Arlington National Cemetery hails Round as the originator of the Peace Jubilee. But the idea for the event actually came from D.H. Russell, who was among the last Confederate troops to surrender in Greensboro. Russell was wounded at First Manassas, and after the war he became a newspaper editor and civic leader in Anderson, South Carolina. On January 2, 1911, Russell wrote a letter to the editor of the Washington Post.
The 21st day of next July will be the 50th anniversary of the First Battle of Manassas, and it has occurred to me that it would be a gracious thing, and tending to promote peace and good feeling, if Congress would make an appropriation to bring together in a national encampment on that celebrated field the survivors of both armies who actually participated in the battle. It would be a spectacle that could not take place in any other country on the globe, and would have a good effect in promoting the rising tide of peace and goodwill that seems to be prevailing over the country, and in wiping out any remaining animosities. What do you think of it?
George Round thought it was a great idea, and it was the old veteran, not Congress, who turned it into a reality just half a year after reading Russell's letter in the newspaper. A remarkable feat, says Ed Clark.
He pulled all of these people together, and if you think about trying to get, in rural Virginia at that time, this many people, to transport that far, to get that message out that far, to coordinate all of that, it must have taken a tremendous amount of effort and energy. But I think, his whole life was an example of that energy.
He was very powerful and very wealthy at that time, and he could write to people across the nation and say, you know what we're going to do, and we need the money to do it. And he did.
It was so successful that many of the later events of that 50th anniversary throughout America really modeled itself after what was done here at Manassas.
If you can imagine being on the field with people who you were shooting at 50 years before, and now you're old and grizzled and probably walking with a cane, and shaking hands with someone, looking them in the eye, and realizing, well, we both survived. We can honor each other's dedication, we can honor each other's service, and we can look at each other as veterans, American veterans, and move forward.
To bring this often overlooked moment in history to life for a modern audience, Elston combined characters from past and present to play out scenes on the old courthouse lawn, 100 years to the day after the original event.
It's a kind of environmental impact piece of theater and history that I've sort of been dreaming about for this community for a long time. So when I was asked to consider writing this piece, it didn't take me long to sort of have at least the bones of what I wanted to do together. Making it an enjoyable piece of theater was another step. And so the investment of comedy, the investment of particular characters and their stories so that we are pulled in and become interested, the mixing of environment and then and now. All of that, we hope, creates a tapestry, a mosaic of celebration. Civil War, it's difficult to celebrate. You can commemorate. You can, keep memories alive. You can talk about the stories that weave together. But you can't really celebrate such a bloody war. You can celebrate the Peace Jubilee. You can celebrate people coming together and those veterans meeting again in their dotage to hold hands, to put their arms around each other, to stand around a campfire, which they did here on the lawn. We're sitting in the courthouse in Manassas City now, where the event happened in 1911. And the lawn was dotted with campfires for an entire week as the veterans didn't leave this property. And they told stories, and they laughed, and they sang, and they really had a jubilee. We have this dance among the people. We have these scenarios among this crowd. We have the President of the United States coming down Grant Avenue in his car, being led by children of the community.
As promised, folks, the President of the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, when we look back on that period of 50 years ago, a feeling of sadness must overcome us. For that is a period we dislike to look back upon, a period of sorrow and discouragement, reviving in our minds all the strain and trial of that awful struggle. I do not know if it might have been achieved in some more peaceful way. I do not know if we could have found an alternate path. But I do know that in that struggle, each side showed a strength which neither side had known that it possessed, developed a strength of character before the entire world, that the world had never witnessed before. It is my greatest ambition as President of these United States to do everything sensible and everything reasonably possible to bring the two sections of this country even closer together, if such be possible. To make them feel in the South as well as in the North that the Supreme Court of the United States is their Supreme Court, the Congress, their Congress, the President of the United States, their President.
America, from sea to sea, your keystone is our liberty. Oh, glory is our flag so grand, which proudly waves o'er sea and land. its bounds.